My name is Sage Whitmore, and I am 28 years old. When I walked into my empty apartment last Tuesday evening, I thought I had been robbed. My custom Italian leather sectional handcrafted dining set and vintage mahogany bookshelf were gone. $13,800 worth of furniture I had saved for 2 years to buy. Then I found the note from my mother explaining she had given everything to my sister as a housewarming gift. That moment shattered everything I believed about family loyalty and changed our family dynamic forever. But before we dive into how my own mother betrayed me in the most unthinkable way possible, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you are ready for a family drama that will leave you absolutely speechless, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you will want to see how this tale of family betrayal unfolds and how sweet revenge can taste when served at exactly the right temperature. Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare. I had been working double shifts at the marketing firm for 18 months, saving every penny I could spare. Living in downtown Seattle meant paying premium rent, but I had finally scraped together enough money to furnish my one-bedroom apartment properly. Not with cheap furniture from discount stores, but with pieces that would last a lifetime. The Italian leather sectional cost $4,200. I remember standing in the showroom, running my hands over the buttery soft cognac leather, knowing it would be the centerpiece of my living room. The dining set was another $3,800, solid walnut, with hand-carved details that reminded me of my grandmother's antique pieces. The mahogany bookshelf, imported from a craftsman in North Carolina, cost $2,400, but was worth every cent with its intricate woodwork and perfect finish. The remaining pieces, including a coffee table, side tables, and accent chairs, brought the total to exactly $13,800. I had been so proud when everything was delivered. For the first time since moving out of my childhood home 5 years earlier, my apartment felt like a real home. I would come back from those exhausting 14-hour days and sink into that leather sectional feeling, like all the sacrifice had been worth it. My sister Melody had visited the week before everything disappeared. She was getting married to her longtime boyfriend Derek in 3 months and had been complaining constantly about how expensive everything was. Not the wedding itself, mind you, but furnishing their new house. Melody had always been the favorite child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While I worked 2 jobs through college to pay my own way, she had gotten a full ride from mom and dad, complete with a brand new car and monthly allowance. During her visit, Melody had made several comments about my furniture. She kept touching the leather sectional and asking where I had bought everything. When I told her the prices, her eyes widened, but not with admiration. There was something else there, something that should have been a warning sign. She made jokes about how I was living beyond my means, how maybe I should have started with less expensive pieces. At the time, I brushed it off as typical Melody behavior, always needing to be the center of attention and diminish everyone else's accomplishments. The morning of the theft, I had left for work at 7:30 as usual. I work as a senior marketing coordinator for a tech startup, and we were in the middle of launching a major campaign that required me to be in back-to-back meetings all day. My phone was on silent from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. When I finally checked my messages during my drive home, I had 17 missed calls from an unknown number and 3 voicemails. The first voicemail was from a moving company, confirming they had completed the pickup as requested by my mother. The second was from the same company asking me to call back if there were any issues. The third voicemail was from my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, telling me she had let the movers into my apartment because my mother had shown her a text message that appeared to be from me authorizing the furniture removal. I called Mrs. Patterson immediately. The sweet 70-year-old woman was distraught when she realized something was wrong. She explained that my mother had arrived at 10 in the morning with 3 men and a large moving truck. Mom had shown her a text message on her phone that said, "I was donating all my furniture to charity and needed it picked up while I was at work." Mrs. Patterson, trusting my mother completely, had used her spare key to let them in. When I arrived home and saw my empty apartment, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. The walls looked stark and foreign without my beautiful furniture. Even the indentations in the carpet where my sectional had been seemed like crime scene markers. I called my mother immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. She answered on the first ring, her voice cheerful and completely unrepentant. When I demanded to know where my furniture was, she actually laughed. She told me she had given everything to Melody as an early wedding gift because young couples starting out needed help more than single people who were just showing off. She said I was being selfish for buying such expensive furniture when my sister was struggling to furnish her new home. I could not believe what I was hearing. This was not some misunderstanding or miscommunication. My mother had deliberately orchestrated the theft of my property. She had impersonated me, lied to my neighbor, hired movers, and stolen $13,800 worth of furniture. When I pointed out that this was theft, she became defensive and angry, saying that family should help family, and I was being ungrateful for everything she had done for me over the years. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me when I threatened to call the police. I sat in my empty living room, staring at the bare walls, trying to process what had just happened. My own mother had violated my trust, invaded my privacy, stolen my property, and given it away to my sister without a moment of remorse. That night, I called Melody directly. I needed to hear her side of the story, hoping against hope that she had no idea where the furniture had come from. But when she answered, her voice was guilty and defensive before I even said anything substantial. She knew exactly what had happened. She admitted that she had complained to Mom about needing furniture and had mentioned how nice mine was. She claimed she never asked Mom to take my things, but she also made no offer to return them. Instead, Melody tried to turn the situation around on me. She said I was being dramatic and that the furniture looked better in her larger house anyway. She suggested I should be happy that my things were staying in the family rather than going to strangers. When I told her I wanted everything returned immediately, she refused, saying it would be too much trouble and expense to move everything again. The morning after discovering my empty apartment, I woke up on an air mattress I had borrowed from a friend, staring at the ceiling and feeling something shift inside me. The initial shock and hurt were crystallizing into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated fury. I had spent the entire night thinking about every family gathering where I had been made to feel less important than Melody every time my accomplishments had been minimized, while hers were celebrated every instance where I had been expected to be the understanding, mature sister who always gave in. This was not just about furniture. This was about a lifetime of being treated as secondary in my own family. I realized that my mother and sister had counted on my usual response, which would have been to eventually back down, keep the peace, and find a way to replace everything myself. They expected me to be upset for a while, but ultimately accept their decision because that was what I had always done before. But something fundamental had broken when I walked into that empty apartment. The old sage, the people-pleasing daughter who always prioritized family harmony over her own well-being, had died the moment I saw those carpet indentations where my sectional used to be. What emerged was someone who understood that respect is not given automatically, based on shared DNA, but earned through actions and choices. I spent the morning researching my legal options. What my mother had done was not a family disagreement, it was theft. Pure and simple. She had gained entry to my apartment through deception, taken property that belonged to me and transferred it to someone else without my consent. The fact that she was my mother and Melody was my sister did not change the criminal nature of her actions. I documented everything meticulously. I took photos of my empty apartment, including the carpet indentations and wall marks where my furniture had been. I printed out bank statements showing the purchase dates and amounts for every piece. I gathered receipts, warranty information, and delivery confirmations. I saved the voicemails from the moving company and wrote down every detail of my conversations with Mrs. Patterson, my mother, and Melody. Then I called the moving company. The dispatcher was helpful once I explained the situation. They confirmed that my mother had hired them, providing my address and claiming to be acting on my behalf. They had a signed contract with her name on it and payment from her credit card. Most importantly, they had taken photos of all the furniture before loading it, which served as proof of exactly what had been taken. My next call was to my renter's insurance company. I filed a theft claim, providing all my documentation and police report number. The representative was sympathetic and assured me that family theft was more common than people realized. She explained that my policy would cover replacement cost minus my deductible, but I would need to pursue recovery from the actual thieves separately. The most important call was to a lawyer who specialized in family law and theft cases. During our consultation, he confirmed what I already suspected. I had a solid case for both criminal charges and civil recovery. He explained that the emotional manipulation my family was using, trying to make me feel guilty for wanting my own property back, was a classic pattern in family theft situations. He also warned me that pursuing legal action would likely destroy my relationship with my mother and sister permanently. I told him I had already accepted that reality. The relationship I thought I had with them had been an illusion anyway. Real family members do not steal from each other and then try to gaslight the victim into believing they should be grateful for the theft. While I was building my legal case, I started working on the social aspect of my revenge. I created a detailed timeline of events and began reaching out to extended family members, family friends, and acquaintances who knew my mother and sister. I was not gossiping or seeking sympathy. I was simply telling the truth about what had happened and letting people draw their own conclusions. The responses were immediate and revealing. My Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, was horrified and admitted she had always suspected my mother favored Melody unfairly. My cousin Michael, who worked in law enforcement, was furious and offered to help me navigate the legal system. Several family friends expressed shock and disappointment, saying they had always respected my mother but would see her differently now. Most interesting was the reaction from Melody's friends and Derek's family. When the story spread through social media and mutual connections, people began questioning the sudden appearance of expensive furniture in Melody's home. Some of Derek's relatives who knew about their tight budget started asking pointed questions about how they could afford such luxury items. Melody found herself in the awkward position of having to explain that the furniture was stolen from her sister by their mother, which did not reflect well on her character or judgment. I also reached out to my father, who had been divorced from my mother for 10 years. He was livid when I told him what had happened. Dad had always tried to stay neutral in family conflicts, but this crossed every line of decency and legality. He immediately called my mother and delivered what he described as the angriest conversation of his life. He also offered to help me financially if needed, and promised to support me in whatever action I decided to take. The social pressure was mounting on my mother and sister, but they remained defiant. My mother called me several times, alternating between anger and attempts at emotional manipulation. She accused me of destroying the family over material possessions and claimed I was being vindictive and cruel. She even tried to involve my grandmother, having her call me to plead for family unity, but I had moved beyond caring about their comfort or reputation. Every manipulation attempt only strengthened my resolve. They had counted on my desire to maintain family relationships, to protect them from consequences. When that protection was removed, their actions looked exactly as ugly and inexcusable as they actually were. Melody's approach was different but equally ineffective. She tried to negotiate, offering to pay me for some of the furniture while keeping the rest. When I refused, she attempted to turn other family members against me by portraying me as money-obsessed and heartless. But the facts spoke louder than her spin. She was living in a house furnished with stolen goods and refusing to return property that did not belong to her. By the end of that week, I had filed police reports, initiated insurance claims, hired a lawyer, and watched as the truth spread through our social circles like wildfire. My mother and sister had gone from feeling smugly satisfied with their clever solution to Melody's furniture problem to scrambling to control a public relations nightmare of their own making. The real turning point came when I decided to take my story public in a way that would have lasting consequences. I had been documenting everything on my personal social media accounts, but I realized I needed a platform that would reach beyond our immediate social circle. After careful consideration, I created a detailed post on several online communities where family drama stories were common, including relationship advice forums and legal advice subreddits. The response was overwhelming and validating. Hundreds of people shared similar stories of family theft and manipulation. Many offered practical advice about legal procedures, insurance claims, and ways to protect myself from further retaliation. But most importantly, the unanimous consensus was that what my mother and sister had done was completely unacceptable, and that I was absolutely right to pursue every available remedy. Several users who worked in law enforcement or legal fields confirmed that family theft was a serious crime that courts took seriously, especially when the monetary value was significant. Others shared their own experiences with family members who had stolen money, property, or even identities, emphasizing that enabling such behavior by staying silent only encourages escalation. The post went viral within our local community when someone shared it to a neighborhood Facebook group. Suddenly, dozens of people who knew my family personally were commenting, expressing shock and support. The story reached my mother's workplace, where several colleagues approached her about what they had read online. It also reached my sister's workplace and her social circles, where people began questioning her character and judgment. But the most significant development came when Derek's mother, Patricia, reached out to me directly. She had seen the social media posts and wanted to hear my side of the story firsthand. During our long phone conversation, she revealed information that added another layer to my understanding of what had happened. Patricia told me that Melody had been complaining for months about not being able to afford the furniture she wanted for their new house. Melody had shown her photos of my apartment during one of their wedding planning meetings, specifically pointing out my sectional and dining set. According to Patricia, Melody had made several comments about how unfair it was that I had such nice things when I was single, and she and Derek were starting a family together. More damning, Patricia revealed that Melody had mentioned having a plan to get better furniture before the wedding, but had been vague about the details. In retrospect, Patricia realized that Melody must have already been plotting with our mother to steal my belongings. This meant the theft was not a spontaneous decision driven by my mother's favoritism, but a premeditated conspiracy between the two of them. Patricia was horrified to learn that her future daughter-in-law was capable of such calculated theft and deception. She immediately called Derek to inform him about the full situation. Derek, who had been largely absent from the drama up to this point, was forced to confront the reality that he was about to marry someone who thought stealing from family members was acceptable. The conversation between Derek and Melody that evening was explosive, according to what Patricia told me later. Derek demanded that Melody return all the furniture immediately, but she refused, claiming it would be humiliating and expensive. When Derek threatened to call off the engagement unless she made things right, Melody broke down and admitted that she had encouraged our mother to take my furniture, but claimed she never thought I would react so strongly. Derek's family began questioning whether they wanted to be associated with someone capable of such behavior. His parents, who had been planning to contribute significantly to the wedding costs, started reconsidering their involvement. His grandmother, a formidable woman who valued integrity above all else, declared that she would not attend a wedding where the bride was wearing a dress paid for with money that should have gone to returning stolen goods. Meanwhile, my mother was facing consequences at her job as well. She worked as a senior administrative assistant at a law firm where her reputation for honesty and reliability was crucial to her effectiveness. When partners at the firm learned that she had committed theft and was facing potential criminal charges, they began limiting her access to confidential files and financial documents. Her supervisor called her into a meeting to discuss how criminal charges might affect her employment status. The pressure was mounting from every direction, but my mother and sister continued to double down on their position. They hired their own lawyer, who advised them that while they might face legal consequences, they could also argue that this was a family dispute rather than a criminal matter. Their strategy seemed to be to drag out the legal process while continuing to pressure me emotionally to drop the charges. But their lawyer had underestimated the strength of my evidence and the seriousness of the charges. When the police detective assigned to my case interviewed Mrs. Patterson, she confirmed that my mother had deliberately deceived her to gain access to my apartment. The moving company provided detailed records showing that my mother had misrepresented herself as acting on my behalf. Most importantly, both my mother and sister had admitted in recorded phone conversations that they had taken my property without permission. During this time, I was also building a support network of people who understood the broader implications of what had happened. My therapist helped me understand that this was not really about furniture, but about boundaries, respect, and the difference between healthy family relationships and toxic family dynamics. She helped me recognize that my guilt about pursuing legal action was a result of years of conditioning to prioritize family peace over my own well-being. My father became one of my strongest advocates, using his relationships within our extended family to ensure that everyone understood the true facts of what had occurred. He attended family gatherings where my mother and sister were present and calmly corrected any attempts they made to spin the story in their favor. His support was particularly powerful because he had always maintained good relationships with both sides of the family after the divorce. My friend circle also rallied around me in ways that showed me what healthy relationships actually looked like. Instead of pressuring me to forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony, they supported my decision to hold my mother and sister accountable for their actions. Several friends helped me research replacement furniture and accompanied me to police interviews for moral support. The most unexpected ally came from my mother's own sister, Aunt Sarah. She had been watching the family dynamics for years and had always felt uncomfortable with how differently my mother treated Melody and me. When she learned about the theft, something inside her snapped. She called my mother and delivered what she later described as a 30-year overdue conversation about favoritism, accountability, and what family loyalty actually means. Aunt Sarah also provided crucial information about my mother's financial situation. She revealed that my mother had been giving Melody substantial amounts of money for months, including a $5,000 contribution to the wedding that she had not mentioned to anyone else in the family. This suggested that the furniture theft was part of a larger pattern of financial support for Melody that my mother had been hiding. As the legal process moved forward and the social consequences mounted, the cracks in my mother and sister's united front began to show. Melody started trying to distance herself from the decision, claiming she had been pressured by our mother and had not really wanted the furniture anyway. My mother, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated as friends and family members expressed their disappointment and disgust with her behavior. The wedding planning process became a nightmare for Melody and Derek as vendors, venues, and guests learned about the theft. Several wedding party members withdrew their participation, citing their discomfort with the situation. The story had become local gossip, making it impossible for Melody to enjoy what should have been the happiest time of her life. But I was not content to wait for social pressure to resolve the situation. I had a plan that would ensure justice was served and that my mother and sister understood there were real consequences for their choices. The legal wheels were turning, but I was also preparing a final move that would expose their true characters and ensure that their theft would cost them far more than $13,800 in furniture. What do you think happened next? Could Melody's wedding survive this scandal, or was Derek's family about to deliver an ultimatum that would change everything? Stay tuned, because the climax of this revenge story is going to leave you absolutely stunned. 3 weeks before Melody's wedding, I executed the final phase of my plan. I had been patient, methodical, and strategic, but now it was time for the nuclear option. I had discovered that Derek's family was not just well respected in our community, they were also influential in local business circles. His father owned a successful construction company, and his mother served on several nonprofit boards. Their reputation mattered to them, and they had been increasingly uncomfortable with the scandal surrounding their future daughter-in-law. I arranged a meeting with Derek's parents, Patricia and Robert, under the pretense of trying to find a peaceful resolution before the wedding. We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where we could speak privately. I came prepared with a folder containing every piece of evidence I had gathered, police reports, insurance documents, receipts for my furniture, photos of my empty apartment, and transcripts of recorded conversations with my mother and sister. But the most damaging evidence was something I had been saving for this moment. I had discovered that my mother had been telling people in her social circles that I had given the furniture to Melody willingly, but was now trying to take it back out of jealousy about the wedding. She was painting herself as an innocent mediator, trying to help her ungrateful daughter learn about family generosity. I played Patricia and Robert, a recording I had made during one of my mother's manipulation attempts. In the recording, my mother clearly admitted to taking my furniture without permission and giving it to Melody because she believed Melody deserved it more. She also made several disparaging comments about my character and my ability to maintain relationships, suggesting that my single status meant I did not deserve nice things. The color drained from Patricia's face as she listened to my mother dismiss my property rights and character so casually. Robert became visibly angry, particularly when my mother suggested that Derek should be grateful to marry into a family that took care of each other, even if it meant taking from the less deserving family members. Then I revealed the piece of information that changed everything. Through my research into the moving company's records, I had discovered that my mother had not just stolen my furniture. She had also taken several valuable items that I had not initially noticed were missing: my grandmother's jewelry box, a collection of rare books and artwork that I had inherited from my father's side of the family. The total value of stolen goods was not $13,800, but over $20,000. Patricia asked me directly what I wanted from this meeting. I told her honestly that I wanted Derek to understand exactly what kind of family he was marrying into and what kind of person Melody really was. I explained that this was not about money or furniture anymore, but about fundamental character and values. I asked her to imagine how Melody might treat their future children if she favored one over another, or how she might handle financial decisions if she believed taking from family members was acceptable. Robert asked me if I would consider dropping the criminal charges if the furniture was returned, and I received a genuine apology. I told him that ship had sailed when my mother and sister chose to double down and attack my character instead of taking responsibility for their actions. The theft was bad enough, but the lies, manipulation, and character assassination that followed had made forgiveness impossible. The meeting ended with Patricia promising to have a serious conversation with Derek about whether he was prepared to marry someone who condoned theft from family members. She also mentioned that Derek's grandmother, who came from old money and had strong opinions about character and integrity, would be very interested to hear about these developments. The conversation with Derek's grandmother, Eleanor, happened 2 days later. Eleanor was 83 years old, sharp as a tack, and commanded respect from everyone in Derek's family. When Patricia told her about my mother's theft and Melody's complicity, Eleanor's response was swift and decisive. She called Derek directly and informed him that if he married Melody without her returning my property and making full amends, she would disinherit him completely. Eleanor also took action beyond the family sphere. She was a major donor to several local charities where my mother volunteered, and she made it clear that she would withdraw her support from any organization that continued to associate with someone who had committed theft. She used her influence in social circles to ensure that the full truth about what had happened was widely known and that my mother and sister faced social consequences for their choices. But the most devastating blow came when Derek's family attorney reviewed the evidence I had provided. He informed Derek that marrying Melody while she was in possession of stolen goods could potentially make Derek an accessory after the fact. If he allowed the furniture to remain in their shared home after marriage, he could face legal liability for harboring stolen property. Derek finally understood that this was not going away, and that his own reputation and legal status were at risk. He gave Melody an ultimatum: return all of my property within 48 hours and issue a public apology, or the engagement was off. He also demanded that she pay for professional movers to return everything to my apartment and cover any damages that had occurred while the items were in her possession. Melody's response was to call me directly, sobbing and begging me to work out a compromise. She offered to return half the furniture and pay me for the rest, but I refused. She tried to convince me that she was a victim too manipulated by our mother into accepting stolen goods. But I reminded her that she had multiple opportunities to do the right thing and had chosen to keep property she knew was stolen. When it became clear that I would not back down and that Derek's family was prepared to end the engagement, Melody finally broke down completely. She admitted that she had been jealous of my independence and success for years and had convinced our mother to help her level the playing field. She confessed that taking my furniture had felt like justice for all the times she felt our parents had not given her enough support compared to what she perceived I was getting. The 48-hour deadline came and went with no action from Melody or my mother. Derek, true to his word, ended the engagement publicly. He released a statement to family and friends, explaining that he could not marry someone who participated in theft and refused to make amends for their actions. The wedding, scheduled for 2 weeks later, was cancelled, with Derek's family absorbing the financial losses rather than proceeding with a ceremony they could not support. The cancellation of Melody's wedding created a domino effect that destroyed every relationship my mother and sister had counted on for support. Within 24 hours of Derek's public announcement, the carefully constructed narrative they had been trying to maintain crumbled completely. The truth was now undeniable and public. Melody had participated in stealing over $20,000 worth of property from her sister and had refused multiple opportunities to make things right. Derek's decision to end the engagement was reported in the local newspaper's social section, where wedding announcements and cancellations were routinely published. The brief notice mentioned that the engagement had been terminated due to irreconcilable differences regarding family values and integrity. While it did not explicitly mention theft, everyone in our social circles knew exactly what it meant. The financial consequences for Melody were immediate and devastating. She had already paid non-refundable deposits for the venue, catering, flowers, and photography, totaling over $15,000. Her wedding dress, which cost $3,000, could not be returned. The invitations had been sent, the honeymoon booked, and wedding gifts purchased by guests who were now confused and embarrassed about the situation. But the emotional and social fallout was even worse than the financial losses. Melody's friends began distancing themselves from her as the details of the theft became widely known. Her college sorority sisters, who had been planning her bachelorette party, quietly canceled their involvement. Co-workers at the marketing agency where she worked started treating her differently once they learned she had stolen from family and refused to return the property. My mother faced even more severe consequences. Her employer, the law firm, conducted a formal review of her actions and determined that someone who committed theft and lied to cover it up could not be trusted with confidential client information. She was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the criminal case against her. Her supervisor made it clear that criminal charges would likely result in termination regardless of the outcome. The social ostracism was equally brutal for my mother. Friends who had known her for decades began questioning everything they thought they knew about her character. Her book club asked her to leave after several members expressed discomfort about associating with someone facing theft charges. The volunteer organizations where she had been active for years suddenly found reasons why her services were no longer needed. My father, meanwhile, filed for emergency custody modification of my teenage half-brother, citing my mother's criminal behavior and poor judgment as evidence that she was not a suitable guardian. The family court judge was very interested in the details of the theft case and ordered a complete psychological evaluation of my mother before making any custody decisions. During this time, the criminal case against my mother was proceeding through the legal system. The prosecutor assigned to the case was particularly interested because of the high dollar value involved and the elaborate deception my mother had used to gain access to my apartment. The district attorney's office saw this as an opportunity to send a message that family relationships do not provide immunity from theft charges. My mother's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal that would involve returning my property and paying restitution in exchange for reduced charges. But the prosecutor was not interested in a deal that did not include jail time. The evidence was overwhelming, the dollar amount was significant, and my mother had shown no remorse or willingness to take responsibility for her actions. Meanwhile, I was working with my insurance company to replace the items that had been stolen. The claims adjuster was helpful and efficient, particularly after I provided the police report numbers and documentation showing that the thieves were refusing to return the property. My renter's insurance covered the full replacement cost minus my deductible, but I was still out of pocket for several $1,000s. The process of shopping for new furniture was both satisfying and surreal. I decided to upgrade some pieces since I was essentially starting over, but I also installed a security system in my apartment and changed my locks. I no longer trusted that my family would respect my privacy or property rights, and I was determined to protect myself from any future violations. Melody made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation by showing up at my apartment unannounced, begging me to call Derek and tell him that I had forgiven her. She brought my grandmother with her, clearly hoping that emotional manipulation would succeed where logic and legal pressure had failed. But I calmly explained to my grandmother exactly what had happened and why forgiveness was not possible until Melody returned my property and faced consequences for her actions. My grandmother was shocked to learn the full truth. My mother and Melody had told her a heavily sanitized version of events that made it sound like a family misunderstanding rather than theft. When she realized the scope of what had actually occurred, my grandmother immediately withdrew her support for my mother and sister. She told Melody that she was ashamed of her behavior and that she had raised her children better than this. The conversation with my grandmother was the final nail in the coffin for my mother and sister's attempts to paint themselves as victims. The family matriarch, whose opinion carried enormous weight with everyone, had now publicly sided with me and condemned their actions. There was no higher authority they could appeal to, no family member whose support could legitimize their position. As the reality of their situation sank in, my mother and sister began turning on each other. Melody accused my mother of pressuring her into accepting stolen goods, while my mother blamed Melody for complaining about needing furniture in the first place. The united front they had maintained during the initial confrontation dissolved into mutual recrimination and blame shifting. The stress of the situation was taking a visible toll on both of them. Melody lost weight and developed stress-related health problems that required medical attention. My mother's behavior became increasingly erratic as she struggled to cope with the loss of her job, her reputation, and her relationships. She started drinking more heavily and made several embarrassing public scenes that only further damaged her standing in the community. But through all of this chaos and destruction, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my adult life, I was not responsible for managing other people's emotions or protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. I had stood up for myself, demanded respect, and refused to enable toxic behavior. The price had been high, but the alternative would have been to continue living as a doormat for people who saw me as less important than their own convenience. 6 months after the theft, justice was finally served in ways I had never imagined possible. The criminal trial proceeded exactly as the prosecutor had predicted. With overwhelming evidence and no credible defense, my mother was convicted of theft in the first degree and sentenced to 18 months in prison with the possibility of early release for good behavior. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for all stolen items, plus court costs and my legal fees. The judge was particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks, noting that my mother had violated multiple relationships of trust and had shown no remorse throughout the legal process. She emphasized that family relationships create greater, not lesser responsibility to treat each other with respect and honesty. The judge also mentioned that my mother's elaborate deception and continued lies throughout the investigation demonstrated a level of premeditation that warranted the maximum sentence. Melody avoided criminal charges by finally agreeing to cooperate with the prosecution and return all of my property. However, she was required to pay for professional movers, storage fees, and repairs to items that had been damaged while in her possession. The total cost to her was over $8,000, money she had to borrow from Derek's parents after Derek himself refused to help her financially. The most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was watching my mother and sister finally understand that actions have consequences. For years, they had operated under the assumption that family relationships provided immunity from accountability. They had counted on my desire to maintain peace, to protect them from facing the results of their choices. When that protection was removed, reality hit them like a freight train. My relationship with extended family members was permanently changed, but mostly in positive ways. Relatives who had witnessed years of favoritism and manipulation finally felt free to acknowledge what they had seen. Several cousins and aunts reached out to tell me they had always noticed the differential treatment but had felt unable to speak up. The truth about the theft gave them permission to validate experiences I had thought were invisible to others. My father and I grew closer than we had ever been. Watching him stand up to my mother on my behalf despite their contentious divorce history showed me what real parental support looked like. He admitted that he had failed to protect me from my mother's favoritism when I was younger, because he had hoped family therapy and time would resolve the issues. He apologized for not intervening sooner and promised to be more active in supporting me going forward. The most unexpected positive outcome was the relationship I developed with Derek's family, particularly his grandmother Eleanor. She had been so impressed with my handling of the situation that she invited me to family gatherings and introduced me to her social circles as an example of someone with real character and integrity. Through her connections, I met successful professional women who became mentors and friends, opening doors I never could have accessed otherwise. My career also benefited from the experience in unexpected ways. Word of my situation had reached my workplace, where colleagues and supervisors were impressed by my professionalism and determination throughout the ordeal. When a senior marketing position opened up at a competing firm, one of Eleanor's contacts recommended me specifically because of how I had handled the family crisis. The new job came with a 40% salary increase and much better growth opportunities. Derek, meanwhile, dodged a bullet that he later acknowledged could have destroyed his life. He sent me a thank you card 6 months after canceling the wedding, telling me that my willingness to expose the truth had saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. He had met someone new, a woman whose character and values aligned with his family's expectations, and he credited his experience with Melody for teaching him what red flags to watch for in relationships. Melody herself struggled significantly in the aftermath of the canceled wedding and criminal investigation. She lost her job when her employer decided they could not trust someone who had participated in theft to handle client accounts. She was forced to move back in with relatives and enter therapy to address what the court-ordered psychological evaluation identified as narcissistic personality traits and an unhealthy sense of entitlement. My mother's incarceration was difficult for the entire family, but it also provided space for healing and honest conversations that had been impossible while she was actively manipulating situations. During her time in prison, she was required to participate in counseling programs that addressed theft behavior and family dynamics. For the first time in her adult life, she was forced to examine her pattern of favoritism and the damage it had caused to family relationships. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that setting boundaries and demanding respect is not selfish or vindictive. It is essential for healthy relationships. I had spent years accepting treatment that violated my dignity because I believed family loyalty required unlimited tolerance. But real love and loyalty flow both ways, requiring mutual respect and consideration. I also discovered that standing up to toxic behavior often reveals who truly cares about your well-being versus who benefits from keeping you in a subordinate position. The people who criticized me for pursuing legal action against my mother were the same ones who had enabled her favoritism for years. The people who supported my decision were those who genuinely cared about justice and healthy family dynamics. My apartment, refurnished with pieces I chose deliberately and purchased with insurance money, became a symbol of my independence and self-respect. Every time I sat on my new sectional or had dinner at my new dining table, I was reminded that I had the strength to protect what I valued and demand the treatment I deserved. The story became a cautionary tale in our community about the importance of treating all family members fairly and the dangers of enabling toxic behavior. Several people told me that my experience had prompted them to examine their own family dynamics and address issues they had been ignoring. Some parents reconsidered their approaches to sibling fairness after seeing how extreme favoritism had destroyed our family. Now, 2 years later, I have built a chosen family of friends, mentors, and supporters who treat me with genuine respect and care. I maintain minimal contact with my mother, who completed her sentence and probation, but our relationship will never recover the trust that was shattered. Melody and I have no relationship at all, which feels like a relief rather than a loss. Looking back, I realized that losing my furniture was actually gaining my freedom. The theft forced me to confront toxic patterns I might have tolerated indefinitely. Sometimes, the most painful experiences become the catalyst for the most important growth. Have you ever had to choose between family peace and your own self-respect? Have you experienced favoritism or manipulation in your own family that made you question your worth? I want to hear your stories in the comments below, because sharing these experiences helps all of us recognize when we deserve better treatment. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales about setting boundaries and demanding the respect we all deserve. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to victor, and remember that real family lifts you up rather than tearing you down. Here is to building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and to having the courage to walk away from anyone who treats you as less than you are worth.